Hey guys, welcome to the Counterpoints podcast. My name is Malik Foster. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm joined by my other co-host here.
Hey everybody, I'm your second co-host, Samantha Adams.
And I am your third co-host, Everett Stevenson. And today I want to welcome you guys to our show as we have a great show today. We're going to be discussing the Jackson, Mississippi water crisis that recently has taken place in the end of the month of August. For those who may not be aware, recently there was an issue with the water systems and the issue with the water systems out there in Jackson, Mississippi, in which the residents were not able to have access to water due to high floods of the local lake and infrastructure issues within the water treatment system, which made the water not drinkable nor usable. So the residents in that city, in that city in particular, have been without drinkable water, to my understanding, to this day, which it's a week or two into September, and we're here to discuss what some of the issues are and how that occurred, and what we think about it and what we see the government and the actions and reactions that they're taking in that time frame. Do you want to, add anything to that?
I want to jump in here real quick. Like, the reason why we're talking about this particular incident is because Jackson is primarily a majority Black city, and I wanted us to highlight as a show, we wanted to highlight for you guys the fact that, in Black communities, it seems like there's a lot of underfunding, the mismanagement of funds, or, the communities aren't properly spent on right? So that's some of the issues that take place here, as well as the infrastructure hasn't been receiving the adequate funding and updating like it's supposed to. That's number one, but that's an issue throughout the whole country. But in particular, they highlighted in some articles that, a lot of people have been moving to more suburb areas, more rural areas in Mississippi, leaving Jackson. That's one contributing factor as well. So I wanted to highlight this city because there are other places such as Texas where there's situations that happened, and also Kentucky as well, where we have some of these natural disasters here, and these instances where the infrastructure has been poor, where it needs to be updated and needs to be focused on. I know President Biden's administration, they did a package of, I want to say, specifically to Mississippi, since we're talking about that, it's $4.4 billion. But Jackson itself, to rehabilitate that situation, the mayor said it's going to need about $1 billion. The White House on this Wednesday, they said 75 million they're going to allocate is left to upgrade the drinking water currently at where it's at right now. The water's back on, but they still need to fix the treatment plants. So they also said that, Mississippi is going to be receiving $429 million over 5 years. So that $4.4 billion being allocated, 25% of that almost, Jackson's going to need on itself. So we can only tell like the rest of the entire state what that would need to be updated. I'm assuming it'll cost tens of billions of dollars to update the rest of the state. Of course, Jackson's one of the bigger cities there, so I know that's a different case where a lot of residents stay there. But that's really what I wanted to kind of give an update on the infrastructure situation.
Yeah,
absolutely. I just want to. I'm sorry, Sam.
Hang on just a second. I wanted to add a couple things. So it's not just the infrastructure. I just want to make it a little bit clearer that when the river flooded, there were like some pumps and stuff inside the facility that failed. And as a result, the water was coming out brown, black, and just gross and nasty. And as everybody said, you couldn't use the water. When you say you can't use it, that means you can't drink it. You can't bathe in it. Like, you can't do any of that because it could make you incredibly sick. One of the other things I wanted to mention that we didn't mention is that over 150,000 people are affected by it. And although, you seeing people send water to Mississippi, if you notice, you don't see the kind of initiative of people sending water to Mississippi, to Jackson, Mississippi, like you did with the Flint River water crisis, or how you normally see people helping.
Texas going through their blizzard situation.
Yeah, like normally you see much bigger movements nationwide. I was speaking to somebody who I was at an event last night, and I was speaking to someone who drives trucks, and they said they didn't know anything about it and was surprised because they never even got any deliveries for water to Jackson, like cases and cases of water. They didn't get any of those. And so I think that is also an interesting point to kind of mention, the fact that the response hasn't been what it's been, kind of lackluster from just the American community. I do know Malik went over the amounts of money that Joe Biden has dedicated in federal aid, but I did want to also say, like, I find that to be odd because it's like we're sending more money to the Ukraine than we are to Jackson, Mississippi. I think that based on the amount, and I don't know if it's just based on how the budget is set up from FEMA, I don't know, but I do find it to be odd, and I'm pretty sure that there are plenty of other people out here to find it to be odd as well, because if we can just, with the stroke of a pen, send a couple $1 billion over there to the Ukraine, right? Why can't we give them $1 billion to fix something that's right here in this country?
Because they were saying that one of their pumps even malfunctioned, so not necessarily the overflowing of the Pearl River caused it. That was one of the things. We're going to get into climate change in a minute here, but that was another issue. So, the city officials are saying it's going to be $1 billion plus to replace their system. Meanwhile, we're like, well, where's that money coming from? And everybody's like, Ukraine is getting our money. Sure, they're fighting a war. They can use assistance, but it's not a requirement that we have to help them, right?
Not our war.
Exactly.
Yeah, guys, real quickly, I just wanted to push back on this argument real fast, and then I want to also move back on to a historical viewpoint on infrastructures in Black cities that's failing due to flooding or rainfalls. But one, to start with the Ukraine argument, I think that what some would argue is that the impacts on the war that's going on in Ukraine could have a more meaningful impact on this country as a whole, as opposed to just say the the city of Jackson, Mississippi. And I think that's why we may see some of the government aid in excess for that. But I don't necessarily think that it's right. I think you do need to take care of home first. And I guess they may feel like we are taking care of the bigger picture by making sure that we can keep maybe the gas prices down, also keep some of the trade and other things in a good space. But I also want to go back to, because one of the things that keep kind of popping up in my mind when we talk about this current situation is Katrina. Again, one of the most impactful areas that was impacted by the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans were Black communities again, and it was an issue with the infrastructure, with the levees at that time, and stopping some of the rainwaters that caused it. So it seems to me, like you said, and then also when you look at Flint, another area that had an issue with it, a lot of times that the infrastructures in the areas within predominantly Black communities seem to be unequipped to handle excess water flow, and I find that to be interesting because we don't see that happening in areas more affluent in this country, like you say, whatever, Beverly Hills, or some other a Jackson Hole or something like that. I don't know. I'm just using names of rich areas, but
in other communities, but it's like well regulated. Like for example, there's a recent incident where the Kardashians were using too much water. They got fined and they got told about like, hey, you guys stop doing that. So it's like it's more regulated, it's more under control as opposed to, other areas that are less affluent, like you mentioned. There's little to no resources being put into it.
I feel like that's.
I know it's a
Sorry.
little different story, but it's just an example of a affluent community being regulated and making sure everybody has the resources they need. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. And with that, I was going with, I think with that, they monitor, like to your point, they monitor those areas a little bit more. They're on top of it. But then when we see the situation that happened here in Jackson, where I think the water rose by maybe 2 or 3 inches more than I guess it was normally meant to hold, all hell breaks loose, right? You know what I'm saying? And we have damage to the water systems and things. So I think those areas aren't being monitored as closely as, like you just mentioned, more affluent areas in this country. So that was just something, 2 little points that I just wanted to add in on this.
Yeah, and so like one of the things that we were talking about also is climate change, right? So this whole thing, it didn't start from climate change, right? That's obvious. But what the trigger was the flooding. And we've done, other podcasts on climate change and on its effects on the diaspora, right? Because the way that we are affected is different from everybody else. Don't get me wrong. Everybody is affected. Like you can't say, oh, the weather only can harm one person, right? When you look at Katrina, which was the reason why I said this, because when you look at Katrina, it was a hurricane. But hurricane ain't what did it. It was that the levees broke, right? That was part of the infrastructure. But Katrina, if Katrina didn't happen, then the levees may not have broken then. They may have broken eventually if they didn't fix the problem, right? Just like Hurricane Harvey out there in Houston, it friggin' tore the city up. There have been countless hurricanes, huge storms and monsoons and tornadoes and things like that to rip through these communities and tear things up. You often see that happen more so with you see the damage in lower income communities more so than you do in other communities. That might just have something to do with the way that the media shows it, right? But when these lower income communities get impacted, it's harder for them to recoup. Now, when you're talking about the water crisis, there are people that they don't know anything other than Jackson, Mississippi. They don't have other places to go. They may not have family in other places, things like that. So the way that this impacts them is different from other people who have other places to go, can do those other things. And so when you talk about climate change, every time, politically, when you hear Democrats talking about doing things for the environment, right? Oftentimes you hear the counter argument coming from Republicans saying, no, let's not do that. That's stupid. A lot of that has to do with money. And so not because making changes to help protect our environment is expensive, but more so because, a lot of Republicans are invested in these other forms of resources that, I don't know if that's the right way of saying it. I hope I'm making sense. They're invested in other arenas where, like oil or stuff like that typically can have a negative impact on the environment, whether it's because of the way it's being dug up or if it's because of emissions and things like that. And so those things all have certain impacts of cars and gas and things like that. Like, they all have impacts on the environment, negative impacts on the environment. And over time, it's going to affect the weather. Now, of course, there's that whole conspiracy theory out there that, certain governments are out there doing things to affect the weather. I don't know how true it is or how untrue it is. So I'm not going to sit here and argue whether or not that's,
No, it's true. It's true, Sam. A lot of countries are going through droughts, and they have technology to where they can pull some of the moisture out of clouds by shooting some sort of, I guess, projectile rocket into the air and making it rain. It's not a foolproof system; it's still being improved upon, but it's a high chance of it creating rain so people can get water in areas that have experienced drought. So I know they're implementing in China, UAE, other places in the Middle East as well.
so that might be helpful for the agriculture in those communities, but the problem is you're messing with the way that the earth works, right? When the earth has its own way of doing things, you got to allow it to happen naturally. When you start interfering with that process, it can create long-term effects, especially when you've never done it before, or you don't know how it can affect the atmosphere. You only can predict and assume and hope, right? And so now here we are. We can talk about like the whole.
I just want to add another example into what you were saying. The emission of gas is one example of how that's happened, where we've seen, companies burn fuels and gases to, structure maybe their factories and things of that nature. And we've seen how that caused the earth to be a lot hotter, which then in turn, we recently talked about how the earth spent faster than it ever spent before recently. And we had the shortest day ever. Right. And I think some of those things are because of, like Sam was just alluding to, human
interference
into nature. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's actually where I was going with that, E. Like, when you talk about human interference into nature, of course it's gonna look, we don't have to be like scientists and all that, but we all learned in school every action has a reaction. That's a scientific fact. So if you're doing things, it's gonna affect the planet a particular way, and Mother Nature is going to respond. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. She's gonna respond. How she responds is what we don't know, right? If you notice, winters have been becoming more brutal. Summers have been becoming more brutal. Even the rainy seasons in different places have been way more horrific. You're getting way more rain in different places. Like, you're seeing these things happen, but then it's also like crazier droughts in different places as well. Why? Because we keep affecting the planet. And as a result, it creates these other problems that cost money to fix, a lot of money to fix. And when you're talking about worldwide, like globally, all these countries don't have money to fix these problems because they're throwing money at other problems, and I think that it's important for us to recognize that, we have, here in America, they always talk about how there's no money for stuff, right? There's no money for reparations. There's no money to help Black folks. There's no money for that. But then they turn around and they send money to other countries when we have so many things wrong right here. Like, we have to be able to find ways to fix what's going on here. And I'm not knocking, helping our allies. I'm not. I think that it's necessary. But at the same time, our allies often take care of themselves first. You know what I'm saying? It's just like the airplane. I think, E, you used this example before. When you're on the airplane, they always tell you to put your mask on first before you help somebody. And here we are continuing to help other people before we're putting our mask on. And I think that that's just a backwards way of doing things.
Yeah, that kind of leads us into some of the funding, right? Like, as I stated earlier, we were talking about funding that the White House secretary said they're going to be sending off $75 million in aid to upgrade the water systems in Jackson and Mississippi. But the issue is that the city officials in Mississippi are stating that there's going to be $1 billion plus to actually fix the water systems, right, and fix the plants and upgrade the infrastructure. So that's the issue. 429 million over 5 years, but we can compare that to the Ukraine situation, like our co-host Sam just mentioned. The fact that we can send over $1 billion and they don't have to wait 5+ years. that's an issue. Definitely a big issue in our country. When it comes to war and situations like that, the money can flow pretty quickly, right? Because obviously the United States has vested interest in Ukraine defeating Russia. I don't know what that vested interest is, but it's pretty clear if you follow the money where your vested interest lies. So that's that. And the state of Mississippi is supposed to be receiving the $4.4 billion over just a whole climate change bill, period, that President Biden signed to help combat the climate change. Because it's a big issue, it's a apparent issue. We've had disasters all throughout the country, Kentucky, Texas, of course, Florida, California, all throughout.
Vegas recently had a flood. I think they had the strip there showing that the strip was flooded with water. So, that's another location, like you said, where a desert is dealing with excess water.
Yeah, so we don't want to get to the point where, right now we're going through flooding, but some areas are going through droughts like California. So we don't want to get to the point where we're shooting rockets and chasing clouds as well, like other places. So we want to take care of the planet best we can, and do what we can to take care of it. But y'all got anything y'all want to say?
I was just saying we can't be too surprised if that's not already been happening. Like if it's already happening in other countries, we're in constant competition with who can get things done first with other countries, whether it be China, Russia, wherever, right? And so if China and them are doing it, it wouldn't shock me in the least to find out if we had been doing it right here in the good old US of A, right?
I'm sure we've tested it out, especially in some of those desert areas to see if it rains. But I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but until the technology is more proven, I think, or more reliable, it's just better to just try to take care of the planet the best way. I'm not a big hater on it because people need water, so I'm all for like helping. But
I think I'm cool with helping, right, and finding different ways to do it. It's just don't do it at the expense of the planet, right? You need water right now. Okay, find another way to get the water. Stop messing with the earth because the earth is supposed to sustain people forever, and you keep messing with it, it's gonna mess back with you. So I guess that right there.
Process. I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, it's the long term effects of messing with the earth that I have a problem with. So why, I personally think you should just leave it alone. And if back in the day before there was technology like that, right? When there were droughts and all these things, what did people do? They migrated. You see what I'm saying? They migrated to different places. So it's like rather than migrating, you're going to stay where you are and just mess up the world. And so I don't know. I get it. I understand why people do it, and and societies do it, and I understand its need. But at the same time, it's like, what's the cost? You know what I mean? What are we losing as a result of that?
Well, I would say some of the costs, the impacts, like we're talking about, is the climate change, which will result in more severe weather cases, more displaced people, more starvations, more poverty, and stuff like that, because the resources will shrink, and it's going to be the have and the have-nots. There's the middle class disappearing as we speak in this country, so we can only imagine globally. China is experiencing shortage on their supply chains, and we already know they're the global leader in supplies and shipping things out in terms of goods that people need on a daily basis. Not saying they're the only country that can produce goods that we all need, but that's just the reliance that currently the world has on China and Russia with their energy and stuff like that. So it's definitely things to think about as far as the impacts on the world globally. Do you guys want to get to solutions, or do you guys want to mention any more impacts?
No.
Yeah, no, I'll jump into it real quick with some solutions. I think along with government aid, I think we also need to work on monitoring the different infrastructures that we have for water levels, because it seems to be that's one of the biggest ways that we're seeing a lot of things. Excuse me, a lot of like the more social structures issues occurring, whether it's again the issues with the water treatment facilities, or if it's the issues with the water load bearing, if it's the issue of local lakes, being drained from the water levels that they have been able to sustain for most of our times. I think water is one of the bigger issues that we need to look at within our climate change, and I know a lot of that also goes with the temperature because as it gets hot, the water evaporates. We all know those things. So, climate change is one thing, but I also feel like water structure will be something that our country and our government need to probably work on building more innovative ways to sustain that, to add that, and to also combat it when we have, excessive water in areas that may have not historically had those. So that's my last little thoughts on it.
Well, what I was going to say is, in addition to what he was just talking about, I think that both on a federal and state level, they need to make maintaining the infrastructure more of a priority instead of blowing money on things that aren't as important. Because I think, in part, when you take care of the infrastructure, things like this don't happen, right? Because you're not going to stop the world from changing, especially too, you can't stop other governments and things like that from testing on the planet, despite the fact that I think that people need to leave the planet alone. So if you can't, do that, find other ways, right? And so, I think that the biggest thing is to make the infrastructure, putting money into the infrastructure, more of a priority.
Yeah. So I agree with all of that. Definitely putting money into the infrastructure more of a priority. And my solution is pretty much the same thing. I think more regulation in terms of the infrastructure, like, hey, you need to update it because it's really old. And focusing on climate change, period, and making that a forefront to try to combat, do what you can, right? Have a do what you can type of policy. Like, hey, we're going to do what we can, and try to be the leaders of the world, pioneers of the world when it comes to that. I've noticed some countries are trying to do that in terms of like how they're conserving water and stuff like that, hotels and stuff like that. Like, hey, we're not going to wash every single day, every other day. If we want it washed every day, just let us know. So it's not like automatic. We're going to wash your stuff every single day. So that's just an example of it. So that's our solutions. Sam, do you want to get into some of the book of the month, like business motivational minute?
Sure. So, the book of the month was The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Goodwin, I believe is his name. The book will be posted right up here. You guys make sure you check it out. It definitely gives a lot of insight as to, not just the educational system, but the way that Black folks are taught and the things that they're taught. And, typically we're brainwashed. And so it's time to unlearn things so we can learn things the right way. The Black Business of the Month is A New Black Wall Street, right out here in Atlanta, Georgia, over in the Stonecrest area. So you guys make sure to check it out. It's a place where many entrepreneurs go when they sell their merchandise and things like that. There's a lot more going on over there too, but please make sure you check it out. The link is also up. And as far as our motivational minute, so I'm taking a slightly different approach to this today. And the quote that I found is by somebody by Alok Sharma, and it says that infrastructure is the backbone of economic growth. It improves access to basic services such as clean water and electricity. It creates jobs and boosts businesses. And I think the reason why I chose this quote as opposed to something else that's like, you know, getting you guys ready to get up, go out and go run and do things like make money, is that we have to also make sure that we are working with our government, like, you know, getting on your elected officials to help protect the environment and the infrastructure, regardless of what your political affiliation is, right? Because we all have to share this planet. And so, you know, I often say that we all have to share this planet, but when I normally say that, I'm saying it as it relates to how we interact with one another. But we also have to interact with the planet better. We have to take better care of our Earth. And so I say that because, you know, what's happening in Jackson could potentially happen anywhere. As long as the infrastructure is not up to date, these things could absolutely happen anywhere. It's just about how long it takes to fix those issues when you're talking about affluence and money. So, you know, we have to be able to protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe and healthy. And the best way we do that is, unfortunately, is to throw money at it. And we can't throw money at it because everybody ain't got it. So we need to make our government do it. Government take the money that we give them in our taxes to handle it, right? And so make sure you get with your constituents. You know, you get out and vote. I know a lot of people don't like to vote, but vote in all elections and pay attention. You know, pay attention to the things that are happening around you. So, you know, that's also the motivational minute. I don't have anything else to add, but we do think, do you guys have anything else to add?
No, I don't have anything else to add. I was going to say, just thank you guys for tuning in. If you catch us live every Wednesday, 8:30 ish Eastern Standard Time. And then these videos will be uploaded every weekend on Saturdays around 1 o'clock ish. If you want to catch the special, if not, after early bird special. So we appreciate a like, comment, share. If you guys want us to talk about a different topic or hear our point of view on some stuff, just shoot us a DM. You can reach us at Counterpoints Podcast on Instagram for direct contact, or at counterpointspodcast@gmail.com as well.
Yeah, also to our Wednesday segment is on Instagram. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there. And I wanted to give a shout out to Shantae Tidwell, our new fourth member. She wasn't able to make it today, but we wanted to give her a shout out. All of our socials will be there at the end. And yeah, like Malik said, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tapping in. Like, share, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, and be good to one another.
All right, guys. Peace.
All right, everybody. Yeah. See y'all soon. Peace.
Peace.